Hi guys, Arthur here from Homeowner DIY. In this video, I'm going to be talking about installing laminate flooring. Now, I will go over the things that I've learned in doing this. In my opinion, this is generally a DIY friendly task to do. You need minimal for tools and resources, and once you're done, you'll have a nice floor that you did yourself. So what we'll do is we'll now look at our setup. Alright, so I'm going to put my new laminate flooring here. I'm going to pull off the baseboards, this top layer of vinyl tile, I'll pull that off too. Now this is essentially just a box, but I will show you guys how to deal with angles and stuff like that. Something like this where it's just a rectangle, you'll fly right through it, but once you have to start cutting angles and offsets and other stuff like that, it gets quite a bit more time consuming. But with that in mind, what we'll do now is material and tools. Alright, so this is our materials list. So I have 3 bundles of flooring, and then I have underlay. Guys, as I always say, try to use everything as a system. Don't mix and match when you don't need to. But this is our material for this job. So what we'll do now is the tools list. Alright, this is our tools list. So what you see here is what you're going to need for most flooring installs. So there's a table saw for angled cuts, for safety equipment, earplugs, and then safety glasses. For straight cuts, a laminate cutter, knee pads, rubber mallet. For a flooring install kit, there is a bracket, a block, spacers or shims, however you want to look at it, and then a measuring tape, a pencil, knife, speed square, and then an angle finder. These tools here will do probably about 95% of the jobs when it comes to flooring. Alright, so I've pulled off the baseboards. So before you start laying flooring, there's a couple things you need to consider. First of all, if you have a rectangular room, then generally you're going to want to go lengthwise with the length of the room. Now, if you have a 25-foot room, probably if this is the length side, this is the width side. Probably the joists are going to be running this way. You want to go perpendicular with the joists. You don't want to go parallel with the joists. The reason is the joists are going to move and warp and twist and do all sorts of crazy things over time. So if you're going perpendicular, then the floor is going to stay locked together. Another thing to consider is, like, we have a long wall here, and then over here we have a doorway, so this changes the pattern. I would say go with the long wall first, start on that side because it's going to be parallel. If you start from the opposite side and like this wall isn't straight, you can have your wall and the lines in the flooring not line up and it just looks absolutely horrible. And I've seen this many times in new construction because they don't use tools when they frame the place, and then your lines in the flooring and the wall don't line up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my underlay here. We're going to start on this side here. I'll put the underlay here. And then the first row is, I would say, the most crucial row, because if your first row isn't lined up properly, then you're going to run into problems. But what I'll do now is I'll get the underlay and we'll start with the first row of flooring. Alright, so for the underlay, first thing is, one side of the underlay has this foil, and then the other side has an adhesive strip where the two are going to lock together. Make sure the foam goes tight to the wall, and then this can either be tucked under the baseboard or it can be just cut off. Now for flooring, you really have 2 sides to it. I call it an A and a B side. So this here, this doesn't have the tongue, so that'd be the A side. This one has the tongue, that'd be the B side. And then this is the same thing here. So this clips into it, and then this has the tongue. Now, one thing about flooring is the only place that you're going to have a cutoff is at the wall on either side. You don't cut it in the middle because it's not going to lock together. Now, for your flooring, you need to leave a space between the wall and the flooring itself. Alright, so for our first piece of flooring, I have a shim there and a couple shims here. So you need to leave a space, probably about a 1/4 inch from the base of the wall. This is going to allow for expansion and contraction. Now, when you're laying out your flooring, there's one thing you also have to keep in mind is you don't want to have a small piece. I think they say something like a 1-foot piece is the smallest that they want to have on the end. Now, this won't be an issue in my case, but what I'm going to do is I'll cut the first piece of flooring. We'll do the first row, and then I'll talk about the pattern and the sizes that you need to be aware of. Alright, so we'll measure our piece of flooring. It's 38 3/4, so I'm going to cut it at 38 1/2, and that's going to give me a 1/4 inch gap on the end. Alright, when we cut the flooring, as I just said in a recent video, always orientate everything to the way you're going to install it. So this piece of flooring is going to be installed this way. This is the B side, the tongue side, this is the A side. Don't work backwards because you're going to make a mistake. Alright, so I'm going to measure from the left side here, 38 1/2. And now I'm going to cut it on the laminate cutter. So for the laminate cutter, there's a rail here, and there's actually, if you loosen this off, you can switch the angle, but it's right now at 0. So make sure that you are buttered up tight to this rail here. I made my marks here and here, and all you do is just pull down and snap your piece. Alright, so for the flooring, like this here is not exactly lined up, and this is going to be critical because if your first one is not lined up like it is, like this one's lower right now, that is going to throw you off for every other row. So your first row is important. Now, one other thing is, as we see over here, the wall isn't straight because this piece of junk is so poorly built. But if you have something tight like this, you probably want to take the laminate cutter and just cut it back so it's going to be a 1/4 inch back like this. Remember, your walls are never going to be perfectly straight. This thing is horribly bad, but that is something that you're going to have to keep in mind. Alright, so for this small space, I got a full length, and then I've cut down the next length. If your space is longer, what you don't want to do is have a full length, and then a very short piece at the end. If that is what you've ran into, what you need to do is cut this end off here, and then shuffle the pattern over, and then make this other piece longer. You don't want to have a small piece at the very end because it just doesn't log very well for the flooring. So this is a full piece. I cut this one down. This is now a full piece. And then I'm going to measure and go the other way. Now keep in mind, the tongue side, the B side, needs to go in first, and then this one will go in right beside it. So I just did this for measurement purposes right now. But you're always going to work from left to right. So this will be the left side here with the tongue at the back end. And then this will be the right. So you're always going to go left, right, left, right, left, right down the line. You're not going to be able to flip it the other way, or it's probably really difficult. So just make life easier on yourself by always starting from the A side, which is there, and then clipping the next A side into the B side. Alright, so when you're going to cut this side here, remember, you're going off the edge of the floor, you're not going off the tongue. If you need to, if this side is butted up to the wall, if you need to, you can always just cut this off. That's not a big deal. But you're not going to measure off of this, you're going to go measure off the flooring. So I've got my first 2 rows in. Now that everything is somewhat holding together, I'll be able to fly away on this. So I'll put the next full piece in here. I'll measure the next one over. One other thing is, when you're doing your flooring, I always recommend measure every piece. I know it's going to be slower and tedious, but don't assume that the wall is going to be straight, because your baseboard is 3/8, maybe a 1/2 inch. So if you cut a bunch of pieces in advance and the wall's not straight, then if you wind up being too short, now you have to go and change it because the baseboard is not going to cover if you're over a 1/2 inch away from the wall. Alright, you're going to run into these times where you have to go underneath the casing. And you may have to get it into the groove first and then tap the very end to get it tight towards the wall. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the way I go about doing this. Alright, so this piece here needs to go underneath the casing. So the piece needs to be tapped this way. So you take this block and you see how it has the groove, the cutout. So the groove will sit right in the very corner here. So you put it there, and now take your rubber mallet and just tap the flooring into place. Alright, when you're snapping together the A side here, like here you see how it doesn't, it hasn't snapped together. Take your mallet and just lightly tap. And then you'll hear a click, and then it'll be locked together. So what you see here is this is in line with this one, and that one's staggered over. I've heard different things from different people. Some people like to randomize it. I don't think it really matters per se. I prefer a symmetrical look like this, but this seam and this seam, you don't want them close together. You don't want them probably like within 6 inches. You want it to be wider, so that's probably the minimal. Now, if I wanted to change the pattern, then this is how I would do it. Alright, so to change the pattern, I took one of my cutoffs, so this is the B side. Now, with this here, I can put in a full length, and then for the other side, just cut and then figure out the piece. Now, this is what I meant when I said that if you have to shuffle the pattern over. So this, if you made it longer and put it here, then you'd have your next piece. And then by changing the length of this side, by going longer, that's going to shorten that side. If you make this side shorter, that's going to make that side longer. So that's what I meant by not having a short piece on the very end. Alright, so I put my next piece of underlayment down. So this is the way this stuff works. So you have the foil end here. And then you have an adhesive strip. So you pull back the cover for the adhesive strip. And I would say butt the foam up against each other. If you go slightly overlap, I don't think it's an issue either. Okay, so that is how you connect the underlay together. So with that in mind, I'm going to continue on with the flooring. Alright guys, so now we're going to talk about figuring out how to get this type of angle here. This will happen in a hallway, something jogs over, there's lots of reasons. So this flooring here is 7.5 inches. So if you want to just visualize this a little bit easier, 7.5 inches. So what I would do is, over here at the very top end, make a mark for where the flooring is. Now measure from this mark back to the wall, and then with the laminate cutter, make a straight cut. Once you have your piece that is now technically too long, you're going to measure from the wall to the very bottom here. You're going to get your measurement. You're going to transfer that over to your piece of laminate that you're going to use, and now we're going to bring in the angle finder. So the angle finder is just a piece of metal with the back end. So get the very bottom here, very on the edge, like this, and now go up to it. You don't even have to technically touch. Eye out what is parallel. Tighten it down. And then you're going to take your piece of laminate. You're going to put it on the edge. Make sure they line up. And then you're going to draw your mark. And depending on the angle, you may need a table saw. You're going to cut it. and then you're going to have a parallel line to this. There's no real thinking involved here. You will make mistakes. I still do. Don't fret, don't get upset about it. It's a fact of life. But this is the easiest way I figured out how to do angles like this. All right, and when I say go on the edge, you're going on this edge here. So just like this. And then that's going to be parallel with this here. If you do something like this, that's going to throw you off. So be cautious that you are you're tightly butted up, and then you're going to have everything work out. And just like this, they're parallel. You don't have to touch. If you go a little bit short, just be aware of what you need to add in or subtract to make sure that you're close enough to the wall that baseboard will cover up the space. Alright, so this piece here is going to be the most technical cut in this whole room here. So it needs to be long enough here, it needs to cut back in, and everything needs to fit relatively tightly. So what I would suggest here is measure off. So measure from here to here, here to here, back. Trace the whole thing out, and then cut it slightly longer than you think you need, and then you can always just take a little more off. This is where the mistakes happen because this is intricate. Alright, so the very top where the X's are is what I'm going to cut out. Now, I fully expect to have to cut a little bit more here and there to get a nice tight fit. But like I said, I suggest leave more material and then cut back more if you need to. If you cut too much, then you gotta get a new piece and start all over again. Alright, so this is the last piece that I'm gonna put in. So I need to cut lengthwise all the way down with the table saw. Now with a cut this long, what I would recommend is do a couple relief cuts. So cut here and then maybe cut somewhere there. The idea is if your cut is starting to go off the line, then at least you can stop the cut at the relief cut and then fix your drifting cut. Remember, one thing that you cannot do with a table saw is if the blade is here, you can't start doing this to correct your cut because you're going to bind the blade, it can kick back and you can get injured. So by putting a couple relief cuts into this and then cutting up to that point, if you run into an issue here, it's easy just to take the thing off with the saw still running and then recorrect yourself. These cuts are really for safety more than anything else. If you can do this the first time correctly, hey, fantastic. But for a lot of people, like myself included, I'm going to put in a couple extra cuts that I'm not going to go 4 feet in a straight line, hoping to get it right the first time. Alright, so this is the finished flooring. So I got my last 2 pieces in. So out of this project, these are my mistakes. I only made 2 of them, so everything worked out really well. But when it comes to flooring, for the most part, it's not difficult. I would suggest take your time and be ready to fix your mistakes when you cut things too short. But what we'll do now is an overview of this job. Alright, so that concludes this job. So when it comes to flooring, this is something that takes a little bit of practice and patience, but once you get moving along, for the most part, it should be relatively easy to do. For mistakes, for scraps, go 10% over whatever you need for material, whatever you calculate. Add an extra 10, maybe 15%. Anything that you don't use, just return. But other than that, everything here went really well. This was very small, but I went over the other things that you are going to encounter when you do your own install. The time on this job. The time was about 4 hours. Now this was a box, and I've had it where I've done basically an entire 1-bedroom unit in 11 hours, and then the remaining closet and doorway took me 6 just because of the amount of cuttings and things I had to contend with. So keep in mind, when it comes to cutting around doorways or anything else, this is what's going to really slow you down. But time is going to be dependent on how big of an area that you're going to be doing. The cost of this job. The cost here was about $150. Now, from my experience, laminate flooring will range from like $2 a square foot to $7 a square foot. I would say $2 a square foot is the cheapest you probably want to go. If something's on sale, but its normal cost is at least $2 a square foot, go with that. If you go something cheaper, I've ran into issues where it's just a battle to get things to fit together well, and if it doesn't fit together well, you're more likely to damage something when you're trying to install it. So spend a little more money and go with a better product. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I hope something here is going to help you on your project when you need to go ahead and do that. Guys, till next time, please hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next project.